The Lives of the Saints by Father Alban Butler. April 16th, Saint Benedict, Joseph Labre. Ametz was, in the 18th century, a small village in the diocese of Boulogne-sur-Mer. There, in 1748, Benedict Joseph Labre was born, the eldest of 15 children of a well-to-do local bookseller. When he was 12 years old, his parents sent him to continue his studies under the guidance of his uncle, who was the parish priest of Erin. Sacred scripture and the lives of the saints so fascinated Benedict that his uncle often had to remind him of the importance of Latin and other subjects of general culture in the formation of a candidate for holy orders. Benedict felt, even then, called to a life of total withdrawal from the world. His uncle died in a cholera epidemic. The young man devoted himself to assisting the other sick and then returned home. His only desire was to enter the most austere order he could find. At the age of 18, after having obtained with great difficulty the permission of his parents, he set out in the middle of winter for La Trappe, which was about 100 miles from his village. What would not be his disappointment when the monks told him that he was still too young to enter? His attempts to enter the Carthusian and Cistercian monasteries were also unsuccessful. On 3 occasions he began the novitiate, but he clearly had a temperament unfit for community life. His great piety had something of an eccentricity about it. Life in the cell did him both bodily and spiritual harm. Seeing him weakening at times, his superiors had no choice but to dismiss him. "God's will be done," exclaimed the young man when the Cistercians of Septfon dismissed him for the last time in 1770. Benedict then decided to go on foot to Rome, begging for alms. While passing through Ars, he met Monsieur Vianney, father of the future cure. After having crossed the Alps, he wrote to his parents from Piedmont a touching letter, which was the last they received from him. In it he asked their forgiveness for what he had made them suffer involuntarily, and announced his desire to enter some Italian monastery. However, it seems that he did not ask to be admitted to any, because by then he began to understand that his true vocation did not consist in enclosing himself in a monastery, but in practicing the evangelical counsels in the world. Determined to imitate exactly the example of the Lord and of so many saints, he visited as a pilgrim the principal sanctuaries of Western Europe. Ignoring the inclement weather, he always traveled on foot, without money or provisions. Often he slept in the open air on the hard ground. He rarely accepted a bed. The most he would admit was a sack to lie on. Like his master, he wanted nowhere to lay his head. On the road, he greeted no one. Unless he felt especially moved to do so, he would not lift his lips except to give thanks for the alms he received, to give to others. He was so absorbed in God that in his last years, a painter had time to portray him kneeling in front of a crucifix without his noticing it. This portrait has preserved the figure of the saint for the following generations. Benedict wore a tattered tunic and a pair of old shoes. In a sack which he threw on his back, he kept 2 or 3 books and the rest of his minuscule possessions. Had not the Lord said, "Do not worry about material things, nor about clothing"? Benedict carried the forgetfulness of material things to such an extreme that it not only constituted a tremendous mortification of the flesh, but also earned him the contempt of the people, which he desired so much. For the rest, no one could have despised him as much as he despised himself. He rarely asked for alms. If no one offered him something to eat, he would pick up an orange peel or a half-rotten fruit from a garbage dump, or he would simply stop eating. When he was given money, he always gave it away to others. One man who gave him a derisory sum later confessed that he had beaten him to a pulp when he saw that Benedict gave it to another beggar because he imagined that he was doing it out of contempt. Benedict let himself be beaten without uttering a word. For about 3 years, Benedict traveled through Western Europe from shrine to shrine, visiting Italy, Switzerland, Germany, France, and Spain, and the shrines of Loreto, Assisi, Bari, Einsiedeln, Aachen, and Santiago de Compostela. Mistreatment was frequent. In Moulins, he was mistaken for a thief and thrown out of the church. In Gascony, he was arrested for having assaulted a wounded man, whom he was actually healing. On a certain occasion, he was noticed, much against his will, for having multiplied bread for the poor and for having cured an invalid. In 1774, after visiting the shrine of Einsiedeln for the 5th time, he stopped his pilgrimage and settled in Rome, from where he left only once a year to go to Loreto. He spent the night in the ruins of the Colosseum and the day in the churches of the city. Since he always attended the 40 hours, the Romans ended up calling him the Saint of the 40 Hours. Many people who knew him only by sight testified in the beatification process that they had been deeply impressed by seeing him absorbed in prayer before the Blessed Sacrament or before a crucifix. Weakness forced Benedict to spend his nights in a poorhouse, where his obedience and piety attracted the attention of those in charge. Benedict was always the last to come to receive his portion of soup, and often gave it away to someone else who was hungrier than he was. Early in Lent 1783, Benedict came down with a violent cold, but he did not interrupt his pious practices. On Holy Wednesday, he attended Mass at his favorite church, Santa Maria del Monte, and there he fainted. People who knew him attended to him on the steps outside the church, and a butcher from the neighborhood transported him to his own home. Benito was in agony. He received the last sacraments and died at 8 o'clock in the evening at the age of 35. Scarcely had he breathed his last when the children began to shout, "The saint is dead!" The news spread immediately throughout the city. In a very short time, the name of Benedict Joseph Labre became famous throughout Christendom. The story called The Beggar of Rome, written by the priest who had been Benedict's confessor in the last years of his life, undoubtedly contributed to this. His canonization took place exactly a century later, in 1883,